from my perspective, I think there's still some dislike between like colored and black people against the white people with obvious understanding, but I feel like sometimes we're not moving forward. We're keeping in this thing of like, oh, but in the past this is what you guys did to us, and it's like I know. And
the first session is going to be about understanding colored identity. Okay, so what it means to be colored, and I'm going to be focusing on now a bit on South African since we have like 3. But we're gonna dive deep into the other, you guys too. And so, what it means to be colored in South African contexts.
Okay, so in South Africa, Zimbabwe, some parts of Botswana and Namibia, a colored person is a person who is of mixed race. So they have. They're not completely or pure black or not completely pure white. They're mixed with other racial ethnicities. So that is what colored is.
Okay. Yeah? Okay. So how? Okay. So you said you're like colored, right?
Yes.
And how does that like label you? That label means to you?
In growing up, I was born in Zimbabwe, grew up in South Africa. It's a norm. Yeah, it's like it's a normal thing there. It's you go to, for example, in South Africa, when you go to like official businesses, for example, like a Home Affairs office or to apply for a passport or whatever the case is, you've got to tick your race in a box. So you have black, white, colored, Indian, Asian, other, whatever the case is. So being colored in South Africa or Zimbabwe, wherever else, is the norm for us. So it's not like anything that's wow.
Wow, that is wow for me. I mean, the fact that you have to tick one of the boxes, or like 5 boxes, and then wow.
I have a question though. Like, do you have some kind of understanding at the regional or national level where, because you can identify as, like, you perceive yourself as colored, but you might be considered legally or something as mixed. Yeah. Like this difference is unclear to me, at least. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I think I get what she's saying, because you see how recently people can identify themselves as other things, even when we see them as what they are. So like, let's say you may think you're colored, but then I may look at you and say, no, she's black. Yeah. So like, how does that work? How does that work in your country?
Yeah, that actually brings us, literally, it's the next question that I wanted to ask you, like the difference between being colored and mixed, because for other part of the not even the continent, the whole world, it sounds the same. So what is the difference between colored and mixed in South Africa?
I'm going to give a long-winded answer.
Okay.
Those are 2 different questions. So in terms of officially, yes, we are an official race group because during the apartheid system, which most African countries, even though we were colonized, most of us were colonized, not Ethiopia. We had the system where there was oppression from outsiders oppressing us. But with South Africa, when colonization ended in 1948, we had a splitting of the race groups in terms of black, and we were all put into a hierarchy. So we had white, Indian, and colored, and black. So colored was a race group that was established for mixed race people, what we refer to as mixed race people. But we were given our own identity. That means we reported to the House of Colored Affairs. I was born during apartheid. So for the first 8 years of my life, I lived in a colored area because that was what was demarcated for me. My parents, who are mixed race from different races, were put together to live in one race group. So let me explain in terms of my family. My mom is from a Mauritian father who's half Indian, half Mauritian, we're not sure. And then her mom is from half German and half Khoisan, all right, from the Western Cape. So that's her mix. And then my dad is from a Xhosa lady, and his dad is first generation colored, which would have been his British grandfather and his Sesotho grandmother. Okay?
Oh my God.
So that's their mix.
Wow.
And then they met in one city and they got married and they had us. Now, during this time, 1948, my parents were born in the 50s. So in the 50s was when the Group Areas Act came about. So 1948, apartheid starts. Group Areas Act is where we're splitting you into your different race groups. Mixed Marriages Act came about. You're not allowed to marry outside of those race groups. If you do, you're committing a crime. So my mom distinctly remembers moving from one building where all different races lived together to another building where only colored people were allowed to live. So everybody that was mixed race was put together. And then my dad, his father grew up as an African man, even though he had a white dad and a black mom. But him and his siblings had to go to colored boarding school because they lived on the farm, so he went to boarding school. So he grew up with colored people, and this is where the identity came from. Now, the difference between mixed race and colored. People who grew up or come from parents within this identity, like my children, if I have children with another colored person who grew up with parents that were part of that regime, they would be colored children. But if a black man and a white woman, like Kimmy goes in and has a child with a person of a different race, that's a mixed race child because they didn't grow up within the culture of being colored. So we were all put together for all of those years. And then I still remember the day apartheid ended. My grandparents coming to my school to vote, and why are all these people coming to my school, and my parents being IEC officers, and everybody roaring when Mandela was like elected as the president. Like, I have good memories of that. But thereafter, things started changing, and that's where the concept of mixed race came about, because we demolished the races, but it's still a way that we identify. So,
Wow.
That's the differentiating factor. We, as a colored race, we ended up developing our own culture, even though we were religiously different. We do pickle fish on Easter weekend. We eat cook sisters after church on Sunday, or on a Sunday, irrespective of your religion. We have cook sisters. We jazz. That's how we jazz. We jazz.
Yeah.
We have
Curries.
curries. Bobwatis as well. I know my grandfather's very musical. We played in bands. We sing. Having a live band is pretty normal for us. Sunday lunch at a table, a long table where your whole family attends, and we dive into each other's lives. What is happening with you? Your marks like this. That's
It's like
normal.
spill the tea
Yes.
kind of thing.
Yes. So we developed our own culture based on this oppression. And so that's why we identify as colored, which has been so misunderstood by the rest of the world.
Oh my God, that's history.
Yeah, it's kind of like this separation that has happened in South Africa during apartheid was kind of owned by you guys. So you're like, we were separated, but now this is who we are, and we identify as that.
Exactly.
Oh my God. So colored is more about the culture, not about your skin or any other features that you have on your face.
Yes, and another point that I wanted to make is it's not, some of us are colored with black relatives, like I'm colored with black relatives, and some of us are colored that don't have any black heritage. Yeah, because it's just about being mixed race. You were put into this. So some people see it as an anti-black sentiment, where there are some coloreds that they cannot, for all intents and purposes, identify as black because they don't have any black blood in them. So I think that's where a lot of confusion comes in. And being black in South Africa is not just a color. It means that you have a tribe, you have a language,
Okay.
you have customs, you have practices.
Tradition.
So they recognize us and we recognize them as being different. And it's not like they know we come from them, we know we come from them. But it's not the same. It's just not
Yeah. Okay. So their culture is like goes deep into South African roots. Nice. This is amazing. This clears a lot of
Kind of mind
things.
blowing at this point. It's really nice.
You know,
really
it's
great.
informative about perspective, right? It is a good information. Wow. Yeah, so actually, the third question would be history of impact of apartheid, right? I was, yeah, I like it. Yeah, we touched base on that. That is true. That is true.
I think it would be unfair not to mention the racial impact that it had. So in my community, I'm dark.
You're dark.
Yes, I'm dark in the colored community.
Really?
Because you must remember the fairest person can look like him. So
Wait a minute, but Kim is white South
Yes,
African.
but if you can go ahead.
I was saying, but this is the thing about like South Africa. I think this is also why people consider us the rainbow nation, is because colored people can look like me or they can look like Whitney, for example. You know, there's such a broad spectrum of color within different cultures that is really like, you know,
Yeah.
different.
I'm so happy that you brought the rainbow like project, because I've heard about it and it's huge, right? It's like, and can you say a little bit about rainbow?
Well, for me, the Rainbow Nation means like we have so much different so many different cultures, so many different colors, so many different religions, heritages, and everything that is just it's like a rainbow, you know. And it's what makes South Africa really beautiful, is that everyone's cooperating together, working together in this one country.
Okay. Was it successful? To say, because I think it's important to touch it, because
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think there's still some dislike between like colored and black people against the white people, with obvious understanding, but I feel like sometimes we're not moving forward. You know, we're keeping in this thing of like, oh, but you know, in the past, this is what you guys did to us. And it's like, I know, and I empathize with that. In my high school, I took history, and for many, many months, we spoke only about apartheid and what it did to people of like color, and what it, like the white person did, and how bad it was. You know, and it's like, I understand that. I understand what my ancestors were a part of.
yeah.
But I don't sympathize with that anymore. Like, I never have, but you know, I don't sympathize with that.
Yeah.
I like being part of this colored community, this black community. It's really fun, interesting learning about the different tribes, learning about the different cultures.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting.
I think when you ask if it's successful or not, you know, when we attained freedom, it was twofold. It was freedom from being pushed into different corners of the country. It was freedom from carrying a dompas if you were a black person, having to report to white people about where you are, why are you here. It was freedom from being segregated from each other, but it wasn't economic freedom. And that's where part of the problem comes in. That's where we are taking 10 steps back, because there's issues with the Group Areas Act that I mentioned. You could have been an owner of a house and your house was taken away from you, which put you at an economic disadvantage. And you were put into an area where you didn't have running water, you didn't have electricity. Your standard of living was reduced based on your race. Also, certain people were educated to a certain level to fill certain sectors of society based on your race. So we have an 80% black population who was not educated to the level of the white minority. Colors and Indians kind of fitted in between. You could be educated in certain sectors to serve your community only. Mandela was a lawyer.
Yeah.
He was a lawyer because he lived in a Bantu land that was meant only for black people. And he was able to only service the black community as a lawyer because they needed their own lawyers. But he could never go to an Indian person and be that person's lawyer, which was part of the unfairness of it. So what apartheid did was cripple a large majority of the population economically. And these factors have not been addressed. These are the things that people need help with. We have BEE, we have NASFAS, we have different methods of trying to bridge the gap. But with new democracies, we learn that people are corrupt. people are greedy, people are corrupt, people want to create generational wealth. So a lot of those funds are being squandered on individuals instead of going into the communities and servicing communities. We have children that still go to school with pit toilets. If you don't know what a pit toilet is,
What
it's
is
the one
that?
that you dig in a tree and you've got to and do your business. And there are kids that drown in those toilets, and then we have Range Rovers
My God.
and G-Wagons,
Yeah.
and Ferraris on the other side of the country. So there's still this big divide between rich and poor, and because we are a booming economy, so many people come in, and everybody's just taking and taking and taking. And personally, I feel like there needs to be some aspects of socialism where we go back and say, okay, we need to hold hands and fix the gap. We have to find a way of bridging the gap between rich and poor, and that's why there's so much hatred between the races, because of the economic oppression that we still experience.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's like 80% of Black South African, even though we don't have it in this podcast, right? And did they do anything like, for example, Mandela was actually working. So I remember even when I was grade 4, we actually were obligated to know word by word of his speech as an Ethiopian, imagine. So it's like, so that we can have that mentality that even as in Africa, we have to be united, right? So did the Black community, like the Black South Africans, do anything actually? Because you said like they're like 80%, they're a huge majority, right? And the white South Africans are the minority. Right? So how is that? Like, is it like they are expecting for the government or something to do, or have they ever tried as a Black South Africans?
I think this is another misconception.
Okay.
And this is where the xenophobia comes in, because we hear from a lot of people that come into South Africa. Now, I've already informed you that we had a system of education that reduced the level of education for Black people, which means that the jobs they can get, even now, if you were 20 years old when apartheid ended, you started your family as a man, as a Black man. There was no going to university. Nobody was giving you a handout. You got mouths to feed.
Yeah.
If you were trained to be a gardener, that's all you have. And then we had a huge influx of different African people coming into the country to do those very same jobs. And saying, but South Africans are lazy. South Africans are don't want to work. So if I'm getting paid 50 Rand a day, and you come in and you say you're going to do it for 30 Rand a day, and you're not going to pay tax, and I am, how am I going to still feed my children with less money? I can't compete. So that's where the aggression comes in. So it's not that Black South Africans don't try, it's the opportunities are limited, and it's like you're clawing your way out of something everything keeps on pushing you back.
Yeah, it's
down.
like a dead end, and then
Yes.
yeah.
So there are Black South African people that have come out of that. They get government jobs, they get different jobs. There are opportunities. You study, you move overseas, but the large majority still lives in an impoverished state because, like I said, there needs to be a different method implemented to empower people.
Wow.
I think also that's half the reason why the BEE was created. This Black economic empowerment was to allow for the Black South Africans to get the opportunities they weren't able to in the past, and not, it wasn't like, oh, the white person looks better or the colored person looks better, so we'll hire them. But it's like, okay, you know what? You have same qualities. Let's hire you. Why not hire this person instead of that person? There's other opportunities and everything. So I think this is half the reason why the BEE was created, was to allow for that.
Nice. That's amazing. It's informative, right?